Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a teaching with TBA Rabbinic resident Jacki Honig.
I am so excited for this. There are so many moments when you go to rabbinical school where people are like, did you always know you wanted to do this? What brought you here? And I have a story, but I think so often I look back at little things and I'm like, oh, that was the moment that someone should have known. And I think it was like 10 years ago, maybe. I don't even remember when like people are like, what's your favorite Jewish holiday? And my answer consistently for a great number of years has now been Shemini Atzeret, which is not like a normal response to that question. I think you will get like Simchat Torah, but you often get Purim or Passover, or Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. But like most people don't go, I love Shemini Atzeret. Like we should have known then. So this opportunity is really exciting for me to get to talk about something that I love and feel passionate about and also makes most people go, wait, what? So I just want to poll the crowd now that is more than just Paula to put on the spot. Where are people at with Shemini Atzeret? Like when I say Shemini Atzeret, what do people think? What do people know? What are your associations? It could be, I have no idea what you're talking about. It could be confusion. There are no right or wrong answers here.
I think about Yisker.
Yeah. Yisker, Tybal.
I think a lot more about the Atzeret part than the Shemini part.
Okay. Cool.
And I've come to learn that it's its own separate holiday, right? It's not just tagged on at the end of Sukkot, but it's its own day.
Right. So so that was like the perfect, Paula's not a plant, I promise, but that was the perfect, it's its own holiday. And it's so interesting because it's counted with Sukkot. It's the 8th, Shemini is 8, comes from 8. So it's like the 8th day, but it's also its own holiday. So like, what gives? So today I have kind of two things I want to talk about. I want to talk about the what, like what actually might Shemini Atzeret be or not be. There's this really interesting machloket, this argument for of what is it really? And then I actually also really want to talk about so what? Like, what does it matter? What is this holiday? Where do we find meaning in this thing that Cantor Torty belovedly called a half holiday at the end? Like, really, what do we do with this? So on your source sheet, the first one is, this is where it comes from. This really, I'll read it in English. The first day shall be, so it's talking about Sukkot to start with, just for some context. I guess I could have brought the one before, the verse before. The first day shall be a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. 7 days you shall bring offerings by fire to the Lord. On the 8th day, you shall observe a sacred occasion and bring an offering by fire to the Lord. It is a solemn gathering. You shall not work at your occupations. So in the Hebrew, Bayom Hashmini Mikra Kodesh Yeh Lachem. So on the 8th day, it will be holy for you. Okay, so we have this holiday that it's somewhat singled out and also is the 8th day. And so maybe it's the same, maybe it's separate. And we see this will continue through our liturgy, it is in the liturgy. There are some hints in the liturgy, but through halachic sources that what is it? So we have the next thing I've brought is Shulchan Aruch. So Rav Yosef Karo is a Sephardic halachic source. It is used by Jews all across the world at this point, but it's coming from a Sephardi culture. And then on top of the Shulchan Aruch, you have the Ramah, who's the Ashkenazic gloss. So when customs differ between sort of at the time Western European, but we often think of as Eastern European Jews and Sephardic Jews from Spain, the Ramah will come in and say, we do it this way. So here we have the order of the prayers on the 8th night and day, 2 se'ivim. So Shulchan Aruch has 2 things to say to us about Shemini Atzeret. That's it. Whole book's dedicated to Sukkot. You get 2 paragraphs about prayer on Shemini Atzeret. 1, on the night of Shemini Atzeret, we say in the Amidah, and you gave us this 8th day as a festival of Atzeret. So if you're used to saying the Amidah, or you say Ya'aleh v'Yavo, we still have it at Yom Shemini HaChag HaAtzeret Hazeh. And we still use this to today. So that's the Sephardic answer. here's a separate thing. We have one for Sukkot that we say differently in Ya'aleh V'Yavo, and we say it differently in Birkat HaMazon. And here we get something new for Shemini Atzeret, which also is said on Simchat Torah. We keep it the same. So the Ramah then says, we do not refer to the 8th day as a festival, because there is nowhere in Torah that it is called a festival. Rather, we say the 8th day of Atzeret. So he says, Ela Omrim, Yom Shemini Atzeret. We don't call it Chag HaAtzeret, we just call it Shemini Atzeret. Outside of Israel, they eat in the sukkah at night and during the day because it might be the 7th day. They do not bless on this sitting. We say Kiddush V'Shehachiyanu. So here's a couple, in these just short paragraph, we get like 3 really interesting pieces. So first, we get this really interesting thing that like Ashkenazim and Sephardim back in the day felt differently about it. Rav Yosef Karo says it's a holiday. It's its own thing. It's a holiday on its own. And the Ramah comes in and says, we don't treat it that way. We call it something different, but it's not a chag. Then we have the question of outside of Israel. So many of our holidays, all of our holidays, except Rosh Hashanah, which is confusing because we just did that, all of our holidays that are 1 day in Israel are 2 days outside of Israel, in case we may have miscounted. So on Pesach, they do 1 Seder and we do 2 Seders, and we have 2 full days of Chag. So what do we now do? The 7th day, according to the Torah, is holiday. So the 8th day outside of Israel should be holiday, but also now it's its own holiday. So is it the holiday day? Is it Shemini Atzeret? What do we do? And I've brought some other stuff about specifically about sitting in the sukkah, but that's a question. So is it Sukkot 8? Is it Shemini Atzeret? What's happening? So the Ramah gives, they don't bless on this. So normally you would say the bracha that ends l'shev b'sukkah. And so the compromise is we sit in the sukkah in case we've miscounted, but we don't say a bracha on it because it's really not Sukkot anymore. And the last piece that gives us a hint that it's its own holiday is that we say a Kiddush V'Shehachiyanu. So on most holidays, so for example, Pesach, which is the Gemara compares Sukkot and Pesach because they both have Chol HaMoed in the middle. On the last days of Pesach, you don't say Kiddush V'Shehachiyanu because it's still for sure part of Pesach. So another hint is that the halacha decided that when you say Kiddush, you say a Shehachiyanu. So you're saying this is a new holiday. Thank you for bringing me here. So that was a lot. I'm going to pause if there are thoughts or questions or anything other than like, wait, I don't understand because the halacha is confusing. Taibo.
And I'm trying to look and I'm not succeeding. You brought Vayikra, but there's also Bamidbar 29, 35 to 38. Are they exactly the same thing or does the Hebrew differ?
I don't know off the top of my head. I don't think I have Bamidbar sitting in front of me. I do have Mikra Gadol, but it's Bereshit, so it is not. Oh wait, this is what I have sitting here because what I have for school, I have a Jewish study Bible and Bereshit. Cantor Shorty also seems to be looking, but I appreciate that you pulled up the verses. I did not bring the Devarim verses.
Which verses did you want to compare them to?
Yeah.
It's Bamidbar 29 verses 35 to 38. And just my vision right now isn't going up. I was trying to go back and forth because I can't hold the books. I was trying to do it on Machom Emre and I can't. I keep losing it. If it's exactly the same or not.
Okay.
You shall observe it as a day when the whole. So. I'm on Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur.
Okay, verses.
Chapter 29 verses, I think 35 to 38.
Bayom Hashmini. Atzeret tihyeh lachem. Kol melechet avodah lo tasu. V'hikratem ola yishei reach nichoach ladonai. Par echad ayel echad kevasim b'nei shana shivat mimim. Minchatam v'nizkehem lapar la'ayel v'lakvasim v'misparam kamishpat. U'seir chatat echad milvad olata tamid u'minchatat v'nizka. That's it. It's just the prescription of the offerings.
So it's giving us, it doesn't necessarily, a little bit it's actually going to come up a little bit in the piece that the Gemara, that of later in a little bit of the so what, it's going to come up the offerings. But as far as telling us exactly, is it Sukkot or is it its own holiday, that doesn't seem to quite help us out at all. It seems to add to the same, what might it be? Okay, I'm going to move on to the Gemara, which actually historically comes before, but I thought the Shulchan Aruch was much clearer about this distinction. So I brought the Gemara after because it's a little Gemara when it says some say, so it reads, some say a different version of the dispute. Everyone agrees that we do not recite the blessing. So there's a clear agreement, no blessing of L'Shev B'Sukkah on Shemini Atzeret on this 8th day. When they disagree, it is with regard to residing in the sukkah. So we all agree, if you go into the sukkah, you don't say a blessing, but the question is about, do you go into the sukkah? Some people have a particular custom on Simchat Torah to this day that they do not go into the sukkah. And there's a lot of halachic literature on if you must use your sukkah, what do you do to make sure it's clear that it's not Sukkot? So the disagreement is about, on this 8th day, do you go in or do you not go in? But if you go in, for sure you don't say a blessing. According to the one who says that the status of the 8th day is like the 7th day, then we reside in the sukkah. So if you think that the 8th day, that Shemini Atzeret is like just the 8th day because we're in the diaspora, then you go into the sukkah. If you think that it's not, and you think that it's a totally separate holiday, the one who says the 8th day, both with regard to this and that, to residing and to blessing, we don't reside in the sukkah. And so Rav Yosef said, so they quote through, and they go through all these things, and they're quoting who does sit in the sukkah and who resides outside the sukkah. And the halacha is, so in Gemara, you don't always get an answer. Sometimes they'll just say teku, and when I was learning this, would not have been surprised with the Gemara just said, we have no idea what you do. But they actually give us the halachic answer. And the halacha is that we reside in the sukkah on the 8th day, with regard to which there is uncertainty that it might be the 7th day, but we do not recite the blessing. So the rabbis of the Gemara say it's for sure not really, 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 really Sukkot to the point where we wouldn't want to say a blessing in vain. But just in case we're wrong, we're still going to sit there. So there's clearly in the time of the Gemara this like tension between what is it? Is it its own? Is it separate? Is it Sukkot? Is it not? And so we have that. And then I'm going to bring one more piece from Sukkah in the evidence that it's its own holiday. So Rabbi Yochanan said that one recites the blessing, who has given us life, sustained us, and brought us to this time on the 8th day of the festival. So he's quoting Shachianu, the blessing of time, Omrim Zman B'Shmini Shel Chag. So we bless that we got to this occasion, which we only do on a new holiday. And he brings the example, like I was talking about earlier, one does not recite the blessing of time on the 7th day because it's not a festival distinct from Passover. So here he's explaining, and there's a really interesting question that I think for me really sits with me is Rabbi Yochanan saying this, we should do this because it's a separate holiday? Or is he saying this is what we already know that we do, and therefore we're using it as proof that it's a separate holiday? And this is a fun thing that I think Gemara does, is it doesn't always tell you which one it is. So it might be proving your point, and it might be using to prove the point. So there's one more piece. There's one piece for Tehillim of, is this one more piece of evidence in the camp of it's its own holiday? The Levi'im in the times of the temple would recite a psalm on each day of Sukkot. And on Shemini Atzeret, they would recite a different one that started Lam Natzech Al Hashmini, Mizmor LeDavid, on a psalm for the leader on the 8th. So we have that. And I also brought a couple more sources of how we know. The Musaf offering is also different from all of the offerings, both the holiday offering and the Musaf offering, are different on Shemini Atzeret than they are on Sukkot. They're totally separate, which I'll talk about later in the kind of so what. because I think it's really interesting. The psalm is different, and the Kiddush is different also. We get the Shechianu, but we also get Shemini Atzeret HaChag Hazeh. We get that same language that we saw earlier, and we get that instead of our Kiddush. We say Yizkor, as Paula said, which if it was part of Sukkot, would we do it there? Would we do it at the beginning? There's a question. And we have this very cool prayer that I think, if I remember correctly, Cantor Torney really likes. I could be wrong, but I think is Geshem, is we begin our prayer for rain on Shemini Atzeret. And so it would be interesting that we would tie it. It seems strange if it's the last day. Why would we tie it to kind of the end? In Judaism, we kind of think of the beginning as the exciting part. It's new and exciting. And so it might be a little strange to tie it to the end of this very long holiday. So that's sort of the what is it? Does anyone have any thoughts maybe now that are different about it being two separate, or one more confused, less confused? Does it feel any different now, kind of knowing what it is? Yeah, Gary.
Just making it the start of the season. It seems to be a transitional one. I like that, the fact that Geshem starts now, as opposed to, because that means that's a separation. That makes it a special thing, and allows me to say that it's a separate, and you start with a new transition now.
Yeah, I love that you called it a transition. I'm going to hold on to that because I think it's really going to kick in at the end of this. But I love that this liturgy, this really important liturgy. Rabbi Kligfeld spoke last night about rain in his Vort on the Parsha on Ha'azinu, about rain, about how sometimes rain is such a crisis and such an emergency that we need rain, that there's a whole thing about fasting for rain. And so we know that we wouldn't hold off, and it's marking the beginning of this new season that's really crucial and really important. I like that a lot. Yeah, Cantor Torney.
I did not enjoy my experiences of Shemini Atzeret and Simchat Torah as one day in Israel. It was a frustrating collapse of that experience. Trying to do Yizkor, trying to do Geshem, and trying to honor the feeling of Simchat Torah and everybody coming to the Torah on that one day was too many moods and too much ritual for one day in my experience. And I did it in an indie minyan, an independent minyan in Israel once. I did it in a standard Masorati minyan another time. Both times when I was living in Israel, I was there other times on Shemini Atzeret. And I felt that it was too much collapse as a lived experience. So one of the things that I can appreciate about what you're saying, but I'm wrestling with as a part of the original design or not, is that I do think that it makes sense ritually and liturgically as a teased out holiday, because its themes do seem unique and necessarily so from the ones that get celebrated on Simchat Torah.
That's so interesting. So it's interesting that I unintentionally but drew this distinction between Shemini Atzeret and Simchat Torah. I had come in to draw the distinction between Sukkot and Shemini Atzeret. And it's so interesting now to draw that line also between Shemini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, which I love and I didn't even think about consciously, but I feel that. I can't imagine. I will experience it, God willing, next year, actually, terrifyingly enough. But I can't imagine doing that all in one day and what that feels like. Tybal.
So I had to start, get a different virtual background for this, because to me, Sukkot is primarily about the cycle of the seven species, which also speaks to starting the cycle again with Geshem. But Simchas Torah isn't, when there are always three ways to three ways we slice, slice is not a bad, good word. 3 lenses for holidays: agricultural in Israel, historical, liturgical. I'm sure there are more. Shemini Atzeret and Sukkot, which to me are different, because Sukkot is ending last cycle of 7 species, even though the olive harvest has started. It will not be complete until Hanukkah, but we know how it's going to be in theory in Israel. Shemini Atzeret starts that, and Simchas Torah is something completely different, because that's that's liturgical. It's certainly not agricultural. It's not historical in the sense that Torah isn't historical.
Yeah, Simchat Torah actually comes, I tiptoed into it when I was putting this together, and then I was like, that's too far of a tiptoe. Like, that's going to send me down a totally different tangent. But like where Simchat Torah comes from is also really fascinating. And it has to do, I'm sure there are other sources, but the ones I read all had to do with the Satan and like tempting. And it was very interesting and totally another class's worth of material. So I want to come back to this question of so what? So we kind of see we have this different holiday, but like, so what? How do we do this? What are we doing? What's the meaning and what's the feeling in this? Like I said, this is my favorite holiday. So I've got the next two sources go together. Rashi is commenting on, I believe, on this verse that we started with. And he's telling a story from the Gemara. You can read it if you would like. I'm going to summarize what happens. The Gemara and Rashi actually bring two slightly different versions of this story. So it's interesting that Rashi says this is where he's quoting from. But Rashi brings the story that it's like, so it comes from Atzer, to hold back. And so he's saying that it's a case of a king who invited people for a banquet and said, come stay one more day. Don't leave yet. And so that's kind of the big picture of maybe it's God saying, like, just one more day. We started this season. Again, there's so many places you could mark that we start this season. If you have read This Is Real and you're completely unprepared, you might have started at Tisha B'Av. We may have started at the beginning of Elul. We may have started at Slichot. We may have started on Rosh Hashanah. Unclear, but I will say if you start with Slichot, we started at Temple Beth Am with this concept of intimacy and distance, and we've been coming closer and closer, and we're here in this moment, and God says, don't go yet. And for me, that's so powerful that, like, here it is. Rabbi Joshua Rosowski spoke about how on Yom Kippur, where you see the judge, we sing in major key because you're approaching the Creator, and it's your parent in heaven, your divine parent, and that's you're appealing to. And here we see that again. We see a God who wants to be close to us, who says, I'm not ready for you to leave. Give me one more day. I'm not a parent, but I imagine that's how parents feel. Like, I imagine that's how my mom feels when I go home. Like, one more day, come on, nuke, stay. And so the piece from Sukkah is very interesting. It's the same story. It's where Rashi's pulling this from, but it explains it in a slightly different way. So over the holiday of Sukkot, 70 bulls are sacrificed. We'll read each morning in the Torah reading what the sacrifice was. And it ends up being 70 bulls corresponding to the 70 nations. And on the 8th day, one single bull is sacrificed. The Gemara says corresponding to Israel. And it says, the Gemara brings a parable of a king who said, prepare a great feast for several days. And on the last day, he said to his beloved, the Gemara calls it beloved, prepare a small feast. And so it's this same story, but a little bit different. And so it's still, again, that God is seeking out the Jewish people. Rashi uses parent and child. The Gemara uses a beloved. And either way, it's really God calling to us and saying, sit for one more day, which I just love, I think, for me so much. The next piece is really what got me, but like way back when. But this I love that I keep saying it, but it's so powerful to me that we've spent all of this time with God. I know when I travel and stay with people and when I visit friends, sometimes enough is enough. I'm sold out by the end of it. Maybe God is tired of us. And instead of sending us home, God says, one more day. That's all I'm asking. And so the last piece is really, which I didn't even put a source for. So not the last piece that you have. I have a little piece that I didn't put in. This is my Jacki Honig magic. This is what I love. So this is my one piece of Kabbalah that I just absolutely am in love with. I love the 8th day of every holiday. Achron Shel Pesach is my favorite day of Pesach. Shemini Atzeret. I love the 8th day of Hanukkah. is we have this concept of 8. So if we think about pop quiz, think about the number 7. What are things that come to mind when we think of the number 7, either in the world as it exists or in Judaism, sort of whatever it is? Tybal.
It's the only part of the calendar which is a Jewish definition, though it's universal, because everything else, a month, a day, a year, one can see from astronomy. So the 7 is the new thing.
Yeah, I love that. So 7 days of the week, right? You're talking about that everything else.
Yes.
Yeah, that it's created, right? 7 is artificially created. So we've got, and created arguably from creation, from the 7 days of creation, God created 6, and on the 7th day, God rested.
Right.
What else?
Which would mean that God created it too, and the whole created with words, not with clay, not with wood. I mean, the foundational narrative is with words, and that links to the 7.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got 7 there. Can anyone think of anything else that's 7?
7
Paula.
species. 7 species.
Yeah, the seven
Right.
species in Israel.
Yeah.
We've also got in thanks, Tybal's bringing it back. In some like classical Jewish sources, we've got 7 days before a Brit Milah. The Brit Milah happens on 8. 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuot. The temple's menorah was 7 branches, but these are 2 new ones that I learned this week when I was doing some research. Is there are 7? Well, I knew that there were 7 colors of the rainbow, but I never connected it. That there's also 7 colors of the rainbow, and there's 7 notes on a musical scale. That it's considered complete when you have the 7 notes. Tybal.
And I don't remember, and I can't look it up, but if anyone else remembers, in the Gemara where they tell us how many female prophets there were, was that 7?
That I don't know off the top of my head.
Let me see if I can find it.
We will come back to that. So 7, so we have all these examples. So 7 is considered to be this natural number. And then 8 in Kabbalah is considered to be one beyond the natural order. That we have the 8 days of Hanukkah, that was every day was a miracle, and the 8 is like the miracle of Hanukkah. The 8th, the 7th to some extent, and the 8th day of Pesach, the sea was split on the 7th day of Pesach. There's a custom that it was split on the 7th night and they crossed over, and the 8th day is this miraculous day that they were free on the other side. The dedication of the tabernacle was also an 8-day celebration. So we have all of these things where 8 is beyond. And I think for me, this has always stuck with me because it takes something beyond nature to do this one more time. By the end of Sukkot, I am exhausted. I think so many of us are. We are shuled out. We are tired. And we are on this holiday, Sukkot, we are commanded to be happy, which is, again, a whole different lesson in and of itself. But Simchat Torah, Shemini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, we go and we dance and we party and we sing and we drink and we are merry. And we do this from some magical something inside of us that wells up in this final day that really just takes over. At least for me, it takes a lot to summon it, and once I'm there, it feels magical. There's no explanation for it. And I think that for me is what has always stuck with me, is we get this day, and we get this day where God is asking us, stay one more day. God is coming to us and saying, you are my people, you are my child. Please give me one more day at the end of all of this. And we are pushing beyond nature and saying, okay, let's do this one more time. Let's come back and let's be in it. And it also, I actually want to read, there's one more source on here that I found that I love. Does someone want to read this as sort of the punchline wrap up it goes well with what Gary said if you want to read Gary, but I won't put you on the spot.
We're talking about the one with Rabbi Aaron London?
Yes.
So what is Shemini Atzeret? It is a day for us to think about everything that we just went through over the past month. It's a way for us to stop and to appreciate the holiday. Take in all that we can. It's an opportunity to appreciate the extra time that we have with God. There's a chance to appreciate the extra time with our friends and family. It's a time to appreciate It is a time to appreciate the lack of routine in our lives. It is a way for us to stop, mentally prepare ourselves for what we will be coming next, for what Charei Hachaim Hadim will be.
So after the Chagim, I love this. This is what it is. It's this pause. For me, I invoke and imagine this picture of a deep breath. As I've spent more time in singing communities like at Beth Am, there's this beautiful moment, often at Hamalot and sometimes at Sovev and all, when we all sing and it comes to this incredible climax, and then there's silence and everyone just stops and just takes a breath and then continues on. And that, I think, is what this is getting to. And that's what Shemini Atzeret can be for us, instead of it having to be, have to go back to shul, have to dance with the Torah, have to stand there while we listen to a beautiful Geshem, but it does make for a very long day. Have to do all of these things. It's an opportunity to sit and linger just a little bit longer, to sit and take that deep breath.
Johnny doesn't like the holiday.
And gather ourselves. And take a deep breath and prepare ourselves for what's next by holding on to it and by kind of drawing back in a little bit of that holiday magic and a little bit of that beyond nature and just being present. And so that's my hope for all of us, for all of you, that this Simchat Torah, maybe Shemini Atzeret, Simchat Torah, you find a little more meaning and a little more place to take a breath and hold it in and hold on to that one last day with God and together in this holiday and really, really enjoy it.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.